going inside the issues of our community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
Walking in the door, she would bring more experience on the bench and more varied experience on the bench than anyone currently serving on the United States Supreme Court had when they were appointed.
Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. On May 26, when President Barack Obama announced his nomination for Sonia Sotomayor to replace the retiring Justice David Souter on the Supreme Court, he was referring to her 25 years on the federal bench. Judge Sotomayor was first appointed to the Federal District Court in 1984 by the first President Bush, and in 1992 to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second District by President Clinton. The president drew attention to her life story as a Latina woman of Puerto Rican descent, as well as her humble beginnings growing up in a low-income housing project in New York City, only to succeed at Princeton and Yale Law School. What has developed over the last 2 weeks are not questions about her number of years on the bench, but the way those broader life experiences may impact her role as a judge. Everyone knows that federal judicial appointments are both political, small p political, and partisan. Presidents appoint justices who they think share their general political orientation. During every presidential election, one of the points of discussion is that whoever wins will have a great opportunity to shape the federal bench for decades to come. But some conservatives argue that judges should not allow their personal values and attitudes to impact their decisions. As an historian fascinated by the intersection of personal values, public commitment, and leadership, that position has long intrigued me. This morning, I want to explore that with a man who served as a federal judge just one level below the Supreme Court, and who had been an activist on a range of important social and political issues, especially civil rights, before he was appointed to the federal bench. I am joined this morning by Nathaniel Jones, who grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, and was active in the civil rights movement beginning in high school. He served as the general counsel for the National NAACP in the critical years from 1969 to 78, and was appointed by President Carter to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit here in Cincinnati in 1979. During his 23 years on the federal bench, he also got personally involved with fighting apartheid in South Africa and helping that country move to a more inclusive democracy. Judge Jones retired from the bench in 2002 and now practices law with the firm of Blank Rome. Judge, welcome back.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
Is it important to have people with different backgrounds, different racial, different ethnic, different economic backgrounds on the bench? Because the argument is the law is the law and the responsibility is to apply the law. What is it, just sort of to make it look different to have a variety of people, or is there some real substantive issue here?
Well, your last comment is the correct one. There is value to having a diverse point of view and different perspectives when you're dealing with the range of problems that wash upon the porch of the courts. The issues that courts have to deal with now and judges have to deal with require the broadest possible range of experience so that the result will be one that is fair and will keep in mind the purposes of adjudication, and that is to see to it that justice is done in a way that will vindicate the law and vindicate the Constitution.
But is it the issue, for those of us who are not lawyers and are certainly not judges, is it that by the time a case gets to the appeals court level on the federal side, that we're dealing with such complex issues that even though there's the law and there's the Constitution, that there's still enough complexity there that it's not clear what the outcome ought to be? Or is it just, it seems like some people want to say, well, the law is the law and you just apply it, and it should be clear to everybody.
Well, first place, the Constitution is an evolving document. We cannot interpret the law and cannot interpret the Constitution today in the same way that was done in 1800 or in 1864 or in 1857 when Dred Scott decision was handed down. The Constitution evolves because, as the Supreme Court said in the Brown case in 1954, whatever the law was, in 1896 when the Supreme Court handed down its separate but equal doctrine. Whatever the law was at that time, the world has changed. The situation has changed, and we have to interpret the law in light of modern developments. And that's why you need people with different perspectives. You know, if you look at the makeup of the court, the Supreme Court, there are nine persons. Out of 104, 105 justices who have served over the period of time that we've had a Supreme Court, all but about 4 have been white men. Now, what makes people think that white men represent the norm? They don't have all the wisdom. They haven't had all the experience that helps them understand the dynamics of modern day life. So you need people who come with different perspectives, different life experiences, who can enrich the judicial process.
When you were nominated for the court, you had to meet with, you had to be approved by the Senate.
Yes.
You met with senators, you had to be interviewed. Was it an issue to the senators that you had this activist background? I mean, you've been with the NAACP. I mean, you had been in court arguing cases from a particular point of view, school cases, for example. You mentioned Brown versus Board, but one of the cases you argued was a case to try to expand that into northern schools where there was also segregation, but of a different type. Were the senators worried about that? Was that an issue back at your appointment?
It was not a serious issue. At the time I was under consideration, President Carter had revised the method of judicial selection. He felt it was important to pull the curtains back and open the windows so that the courts would become more representative. And so he changed the method of screening and selecting. He chose in each circuit a judicial selection screening committee made up of 11 people across the board, Republicans, Democrats, lay persons, professionals, what have you. And they considered applications. Anyone could apply. People could nominate themselves. If they knew of someone they thought would be a good candidate, they could submit their names. And this committee did the screening, and they chose from the persons that came to them, they chose 5 names to submit to the president. And then from those 5 names, the president made a choice. Well, the president insisted that the persons who were interviewed, the persons who were considered by these screening committees, be diverse. That they not just consider white men, that they consider women, that they would consider professors, they considered poverty lawyers, general practitioners, a whole range of people, because he felt it was important that the court be more representative. Now, I was one of 5 names submitted to the president. And the White House did some, they did some sampling, they did some checking, and I'm told that there was someone from the White House who made an inquiry about my ability to be objective and fair, given that I was a lawyer for the NAACP. And the answer was, well, Justice Marshall was the general counsel of the NAACP. Do you agree that he has been a fair judge and a good judge? And the White House's answer was, yes, he's been a model. And so we have no problems with the person who comes from that tradition. And so that was never an issue with me. In fact, one of my strong supporters was Strom Thurmond of South Carolina. The reason Strom Thurmond supported me was because he was introduced to me, or I was introduced to him, by some South Carolinians with whom I had some contact in my work as NAACP lawyer. And Senator Thurmond called me after I had met him, and
Just turn it off. There we go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Called me and said, I want to reassure you that I strongly support you. And at the time of my hearing before the Judiciary Committee, Senator Kennedy was the chair. Senator Bob Dole was a member, and it was the Judiciary Committee was a typical Judiciary Committee. And just before the hearing concluded, Senator Kennedy said, "Oh, just a minute, Mr. Jones," said, "I have a message here from Senator Thurmond. He's held up, but he wants me to state for the record that he enthusiastically supports your nomination." Well, that was because Senator Thurmond can count. Senator Thurmond was a segregationist. He's the one who led the walkout at the 1948 Democratic Convention. He formed the Dixiecrat Party. But once the Voting Rights Act was passed and blacks began to vote in South Carolina, Senator Thurmond took a different view of things and realized that he had to consider things from a much different perspective, which included making his decisions with regard to the selection of judges much more realistic.
Once you were on the court, did you find yourself, were there cases where perhaps it came before you that you ended up ruling in ways that would have surprised somebody from the civil rights background or some other background? They thought they knew you, but when you looked at the case itself, you ruled.
Oh, absolutely. There were many cases. I sat on many cases involving employment discrimination, school issues, lawsuits that bore upon excessive force by police officers. My basic feeling and my basic sense of fairness, had I been an advocate, would have led me to one result. But by virtue of me being a judge, I realized that there were certain standards, that certain levels of proof that had to be advanced. And if that proof wasn't there, you did what any judge is supposed to do. You held according to the standards required by law. So in many cases, I ruled against an employee in favor of an employer in a discrimination case, or in favor of a city against a police officer or a citizen who claimed he had been abused by police. So you do your job. You can still have your own personal point of view, but that doesn't affect you in discharging your responsibilities. So the judges can do that.
One of the issues that has been raised is the role of judges, especially judges on the Court of Appeals. At Duke University School of Law in 2005, Judge Sotomayor said all the legal defense funds out there, they are looking for people with Court of Appeals experience because the Court of Appeals is where policy is made. And this has become, at least briefly, a point of argument. What's your reaction to that? And just so people understand, there's district courts in the federal system, Court of Appeals, and then the Supreme Court. There's 3 levels, so this is just below the Supreme Court.
Well, the reality is, if we're going to be perfectly candid, that the Court of Appeals is the court of last resort in about 97% of the cases. Most cases end at the Court of Appeals. They don't go to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court only grants certiorari in now they're only down about 1%. This present court takes very few cases. So for all practical purposes, if you have a case and it gets to the Court of Appeals, that's it. And the Court of Appeals covers more than one district. It covers, in the Sixth Circuit situation, it covers 4 states. So for all practical purposes, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals is the court of last resort for litigants in Ohio, Michigan, Tennessee, and Kentucky. Now, the decision that the court meets and makes in those cases may involve a degree of policy because it's determining the finality of a case. It depends on what the facts are, what the issues are, whether the opinion has to be broad enough to be considered a policy, because it will govern the law in that circuit for more than just that one case.
It becomes precedent.
Yes, absolutely.
And it becomes precedent in that circuit.
In that circuit.
And isn't one of the issues when different circuits have established different precedents, those are the kinds of cases that may ultimately get up to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court has to figure out which of these precedents is going to take.
We call that in the court, we call that a circuit dispute. If there's a difference between 2 circuits on the same proposition, sometimes the Supreme Court will have to take the case to resolve the conflict between the circuits so that there will be a national standard. But short of that, the decision by a Court of Appeals on an issue within that's before it is the law in that circuit, covering all litigants who are going to be faced with that kind of a proposition.
Let me take a look at one more issue. Another one of Sotomayor's statements that has troubled some people has been something that she said multiple times, actually. The one that gets cited most frequently is from a conference at the University of California, Berkeley in 2001. She said, "I would hope that a wise Latina woman with a richness of her experiences would, more often than not, reach a better conclusion than a white male who hasn't lived that life." This has become more controversial even than the first one. What's your reaction to that?
I think those who have seized on that, in the first place, that was a speech and not a judicial pronouncement.
Right.
So that has no precedential effect at all. Reality is this, that when a person comes from a particular background, naturally that person is going to, if it's an issue that bears upon that person's life experience, that person can influence his or her colleagues with some insights that will help those colleagues maybe gain a better understanding of that particular issue. Now that has happened to me many times. I was sitting on a housing discrimination case, and after we decided the case and we were going to lunch, and the judges are very collegial. We were walking over to lunch, and one of the judges who had voted against me in conference was a good friend, and we were discussing the case in a general sense. And I said to him, let me tell you about an experience I had. When I was getting ready to move to Cincinnati from New Jersey, we put our house on the market. Right. And the house didn't sell. We were told the house would go overnight. The house didn't sell. And finally one day the broker said, you know, I hate to offend you, but you may have to do something that's a little distasteful. I said, what's that? He said, the next time we have open house, you shouldn't be there. And secondly, take your pictures down. And I was offended. And I said, I will not do that. I will not yield to bigots and so forth and so on. I said, but in the meantime, the moving truck came to move us to Ohio. And a day after the moving truck left with all of our furniture, the house was empty, the broker called me and said, I have a contract on your house. Now clearly that was affected by the fact that the people who were looking at the house had no indication of who the previous occupant had been. And this colleague said to me, did that really happen? I said, yes. He said, you know, if you hadn't told me that, I wouldn't have believed it. He said, that goes on? I said, yeah, absolutely goes on. People are affected by race in ways you would never think. And he thanked me for that. He said, well, you know, that's something I never thought of. I have to start thinking about that. So that's the kind of influence you have with your colleagues to make them a little more sensitive. Sandra Day O'Connor used to always say how much she learned from her conversation with Justice Thurgood Marshall. Mm-hmm. I've had colleagues tell me that over our lunch conversations, lunch table conversations, how much they gain. They have not lived the life that many of the litigants lived, so they don't know. And when you're an equal, when you're with peers, you can say things to them that lawyers can't say, that can't appear in the briefs, that won't appear in an oral argument. But as a colleague, you can say things to them very candidly, as they can say things to you. And I've gained enormous insight into life because of my association with whites and my association with fellow judges. So this notion that she somehow was in outer space because she said people are influenced by their life experiences, and that if a certain kind of issue comes up, she would probably be in a better position to render a judgment than if she were a white male. That's a reality. And
we can all learn from women. Those of us are
absolutely, absolutely, and ethnic judges.
And ethnic judges. Well, thank you very much. It is always a pleasure to have you here. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. There's always insight. Thank you. I really appreciate you being here this morning.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Stay tuned after the break. An upcoming conference about the future of the economy that will encourage thinking outside the box. Welcome back. For years now, some groups on the west side of Cincinnati have been taking the lead on developing ways to green urban space. Sister Paula Gonzalez, a sister of charity, has converted a former chicken barn on the property of the College of Mount St. Joseph into a 1,200 square foot super insulated passive solar house where she lives and also uses it to teach good environmental practice. Since 1978, Imago has worked to deepen the connection to the earth through education programs programs, preserving green space, developing an urban eco-village, and making Price Hill the greenest neighborhood in our region. But this coming Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, Imago will sponsor a conference that explores the implications of these efforts for the broader economy. I am joined this morning by Jim Schenk, the co-founder of Imago, and Sister Paula Gonzalez, who will be one of the speakers at the conference. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jim, what's the goal of this conference? I mean, this is about the economy, right? This is more than just a narrow focus on the environment.
Yeah, I think the ecological setting right now is very harmful to the environment. I think that, personally, I think the economic system has worked. There's 6.7 billion people in the world, but we reached a point in which it isn't working anymore. And this conference is not looking at what's wrong, but is going to focus on how can we develop a new economic system that'll really work for everybody. Not just the wealthy, but also for the middle class, lower class, and for the earth itself. And so it's really exciting.
Sister, you'll be one of the speakers. What will you be focusing on at this conference?
My major talk is toward a healthy planetary future, assuming that right now the planet is not very healthy. And so the idea will be to look at the bad news that we have to some extent, and then look at the possibilities that we have, because we're standing at a unique moment in human history at this time. We are at truly a transformational moment, as our president continually reminds us, where people have got to wake up to the urgency of the changes that we desperately need to make, or they will be made for us.
And that's a message you've been working on for a long time. You didn't have to wait until this president to...
About 40 years.
About 40 years, okay, just to make that clear. There's going to be a lot of things about this conference, and when I was looking at the lineup, the agenda, there's opportunities to get out. It's going to be held at Xavier University, but there's opportunities to get out and to see things that are happening. What are some of the places you're going to take people?
Yeah, on Friday we're having a pre-conference session, and they're going to be visiting some of the farms, organic farms in the area. Paula is going to do a conference or a workshop around some of the really exciting environmental energy events and things happening in the city. And I'm going to be doing one on the Eco-Village, Enright Ridge Urban Eco-Village in Price Hill.
In Price Hill.
I'll be doing a tour of some of the renewable activities going on in now. My own 2 buildings that I have converted into solar buildings, and my solar golf cart that I now run around Mount St. Joseph campus on. And also we'll stop by the zoo, which has a marvelous new thing. So there's a tour that will go around.
One of the things that I've focused on was that you would be visiting some farms, some organic farms, I presume, but this whole movement to eat locally and not only to grow things organically, but not to transport them for thousands of miles. Is that part of the theme here that you're trying to get into as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's the whole economic system. And food is definitely a huge one. I mean, I think the average food travels about 1,800 miles, which is really insane if you think about it. And so, yeah, looking at local food is critical. Even in the Eco-Village, we've started a CSA, excuse me, a community supported agriculture, which we're hiring farmers who's farming people's backyards, and we're going to produce food in that area. And the trips are going to be, I think, to Grailville and to Turner Farm. And so food is really exciting now.
We just started a new little patch out at Mount St. Joseph where 15 of our employees have taken over and begun some little garden patches for the first time.
So that they can grow and therefore not
correct.
Have to buy things
That's
that have been
correct.
transported huge distances. And are you doing that organically with organic methods?
Organic is certainly preferred, but who knows?
That's right. Everybody's doing their own thing.
They're doing their own thing, but there are very small little patches for right now.
You're talking about here changing the economy. How does, that sounds huge to me. How do you do that, or how do you go about that and not lose hope? Because you can, you're in Cincinnati, you're in Price Hill, you're in Delhi. How do you do that and keep hope that something can really come out of this in the long run?
I think the financial crisis right now is one of the things that are pushing it. I think there's a lot of people hurting. I think a lot of people are looking for, how do we live, and really asking that question. And I think the whole new economic system deals with that issue. And the most important thing is looking at local economies. And how do we, in some sense, get back, but not going back, going forward to me buying from you and you buying from me and from each other, and that we know the people who are producing the food, the products that we want to buy.
Sister, I got less than 30 seconds here, but you've been at this 40 years. Are you hopeful?
I am hopeful because I believe in the basic optimism of the American people. I hope that we wake up fast enough.
Okay. Now, if you're interested in registering for this conference and finding out more about it, go online to www.earthrising.org or call 921-5124. Thank you for being here. Thank you for making Newsmakers part of your Sunday morning, and make sure you join us next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.